Thank you, Carol. Thank you. I'm glad to be here with you to talk about children. God has given us the most important task that could possibly be given to anyone when He allows us to be a parent. And along the way of being a parent, we experience sometimes great joy and great difficulty. And I'd like to share with you some things that I've learned in the process of being a parent that perhaps will make some of those difficult moments a little less bumpy for you. If we can just notice what children notice in their world, I think it will help us to understand why they tend to be less than perfect. Children have an uncanny ability to get our attention. My wife and I, for about 14 years, have taught in the singles department in my church, and I have learned so much about single parenting from those individuals as they have shared their lives with us. Recently, a single mom was sharing with me an experience with her 7-year-old son, Bobby. She was walking down the hallway of her home one afternoon and walked past the bathroom. There's Bobby in the bathroom bandaging his finger. Blood's running down his hand. She rushed into the bathroom and said, "Bobby, honey, what happened?" He said, "I smashed my finger with the hammer." She said, "I didn't hear you crying." He said, "I didn't know you were home." They know when it's important to get our attention and how to get our attention. I have several rules of thumb that I want to share with you. And the first one is, the most important thing may not be what you do, but what you do after what you have done. Ponder that. I am not a perfect parent. Let me show you how that rule of thumb works. I came home one afternoon from work. It had been a terribly long day. A number of things had gone wrong. When I got home, my wife had headed up to here with our 5-year-old daughter. And in about 30 minutes, I had headed up to here with our 5-year-old daughter, too. And the next thing I knew, I was yelling at my 5-year-old daughter. I have never stood before a group of parents and said to them, "Now go home and yell at your children. It's good for them." I've never done that. But here I was doing that, violating something I believe in. And a few minutes later, the next thing I know, I not only am yelling at her, but I'm threatening her. "If you don't stop that, I will." I've never suggested that parents do that sort of thing, and here I was doing it. But I don't believe that that was the most important thing that happened in my interaction in our relationship that day. I think the most important thing that happened in my relationship with my daughter that day was what I did a couple of hours later when I'm sitting on the side of her bed tucking her in for the night. And I'm saying to her, "Carla, this afternoon, when I yelled at you, I shouldn't have done that. I know better. But Carla, at that moment, I was so angry at you, I couldn't think of anything else to do, so I just yelled at you." And my 5-year-old daughter's lying there taking all of this in. When I finished, my 5-year-old daughter said, "Daddy, you could have said, 'I'm mad at you,' which is what I teach." And I had to be reminded of that by a 5-year-old. Now, look at that scene and think, what did my daughter learn that was important that day? I think she learned some really important lessons about a relationship. I think one lesson she learned is you can recover a relationship, because I had broken our relationship that afternoon. Therefore, I'm responsible for reconnecting with my daughter, for reestablishing that relationship. And I did that, or at least began the process of it. I think she also learned an important lesson about admitting that you've made a mistake. How else will our children learn these important things if they don't experience them from us? I think she learned it's okay to admit you made a mistake. But maybe the most important thing that she learned was that I loved her enough to admit those things. And I loved her enough to rebuild the relationship that I had broken. I can't always be present with my children to ensure that they will make the right decision. So let me share with you how to work on that. And this is my Oreo cookie theory. It came about when my oldest daughter was 3 years of age. We were visiting in my parents' home in Oklahoma. It was 9:30 at night. Out of the kitchen, into the front room where we were visiting, came my 3-year-old daughter. Now, I just told you something really important about me. It's 9:30 at night. She's 3 years old. A 3-year-old should not be allowed to be up at 9:30 at night. You see, folks, I'm just like the rest of you. I don't always do all the good things that I know how to do, but I have learned to live with that rule of thumb that the most important thing may not be what I do, but what I do after what I have done. I make mistakes, just like you do. Well, here came my 3-year-old daughter out of the kitchen, clutching Oreo cookies to her tummy. One look at her, and it was quickly apparent to me a 3-year-old should not be allowed to consume 37 Oreo cookies on her way to bed. And I'm just about to say to her, Kimberly, go put the cookies back, but no words came out of my mouth. Instead, there was this intervening thought, and the thought was, Gary, do you realize her entire life you have been telling her what to do? When will she ever learn what it feels like to make a choice? When will she ever learn what responsibility feels like if you keep telling her just exactly what to do? So I said to her, before I tell you what I said to her, there is a rule of thumb that goes with the Oreo cookie theory. And the rule of thumb is you give choices commensurate with the child's ability to respond responsibly. Don't write that down. Here's what that means. You give big choices to big kids. You give little choices to little kids. You don't give big choices to little children. Too much responsibility. This won't seem like much of a choice to you that I gave my 3-year-old daughter, but you must remember, it's the first choice I had ever given her in her entire life. Here she comes across the floor into the living room there, and I said to her, Kimberly, you may choose to keep one of the cookies to eat and put the rest back, or you may choose to put all the cookies back. Which do you choose to do? Stopped her dead in her tracks. She has a choice to process. And I knew she was processing the choice because I was watching her eyes. Have you ever watched toddlers? They think they can see in their minds. She's working this choice over. And she went back out in the kitchen and she came out with one Oreo cookie in her hand. And my Oreo cookie theory was born right on the spot. And I've been perfecting it ever since. Now, you could say, yes, Gary, but what if she had insisted on 2 Oreo cookies to eat? Folks, the beauty of choice giving is you fall back on the choice. I'm sorry, I know you'd like to have 2 cookies to eat, but that's not a part of the choice. The choices are, you may choose to keep 1 cookie to eat and put the rest back, or you may choose to put all the cookies back. Which do you choose? Folks, it doesn't work if there's not the word choose in there. Let me show you how this works in life. When that same daughter was now 9 years of age, she has a sister now, 6 years old. We're driving along in my automobile. There is this huge, major battle going on in the back seat of my car. I think my daughters had agreed among themselves. Never fight until you're riding in the back seat of the car when Dad is driving. Save all battles for that. My daughters are yelling, screaming, pulling hair in the back seat of my car. It's awful. I'm getting very angry. I'm gripping the steering wheel. It's not safe for me to drive like that. My first thought was, I'm going to pull over to the side of this road. I'm going to get out. I'm going to find the biggest fence post I can find. I'm going to drag it over here. I'm going to beat both of them half to death. They will never fight in the back seat of my car again. And then I had this intervening thought. I'm so glad God gives me intervening thoughts, aren't you? And the thought was, yes, Gary, you could do that, but what will they have learned? And I quickly realized they will have learned, go as far as you want to go, be as out of control as you want to be. Dad will finally stop you when it gets to be too much. You don't have to control yourself. He will control you. And I thought, I don't want that for my daughters. So I pulled over to the side of the road. I turned the key off. That's a good sign we're going to be here a while. Folks, if it's important, we should take time for it. I turned and I said to my daughters, girls, we are about to institute a new and significant policy within the confines of this automobile. I got their attention. Just an aside, folks. Use big words to get your children's attention. Make them up. You don't have to know how to spell them. We were in the pizza place. We used to go to the pizza place a lot. I'll come back to my Oreo cookie theory. We used to go to the pizza place a lot when my children were younger because quite by accident we discovered some of our most important family discussions took place in the pizza place. At home, we would finish eating and everybody scatters like quail. Got something to do, homework to do, or go across the street and play. But have you noticed when you go out to eat, nobody leaves until everybody leaves? You're there together. And these wonderful family discussions would emerge in the pizza place. I've also observed that in the pizza place there, at least the ones we frequented, there were these electronic mechanisms, games. It's kind of like the Las Vegas syndrome. You know, if you've got money in your pocket, you're supposed to put it in these machines. They're everywhere. And my son is into those electronic games. He was about 6 years old at the time. We're eating, and he's standing there wanting quarters to put in this electronic game. And I turned to him and I said, Craig, son, when we come to the pizza establishment, we come to partake of the food they provide, not to engage in the manipulation of mechanical mechanisms. I got his attention. He just sort of wandered off with this glaze on his face. That was one reaction. The other reaction was two guys in a booth next to me just cracked up. I know they thought that I was a nut, but that's okay. I got my son's attention. I have used that expression in the car in other places enough times that my children can quote it verbatim. Girls, we are about to institute a new and significant policy in this automobile, and the policy is when you choose to fight in the back seat of this car, you choose to give up TV for the day. My daughters were really into TV. It was important to them. Not that they watch 5 or 6 hours a day like many children do, but they did get to watch an hour a day. So that's why I'm using that. When you choose to fight in the back seat of this car, you choose to give up TV for that day. When you choose not to fight in the back seat of this car, you choose to get to watch TV that day. How many times did I use the word choose? 4 times. It's clear where the responsibility is being placed. When you choose. I went through that 3 times because I wanted to make sure they understood what the choices were. I started the car. I drove 5 blocks. The fight started again. Folks, I was almost proud of myself. With great calmness, I turned and said, girls, I see you've chosen to give up TV for the rest of the day. You would have thought I had dumped ice water on them. It just shut everything down. They were suddenly calm and quiet. Not only that, they were calm and quiet all the way home. And we were a long way from home. And when we drove into the garage, my girls said, what? Can we watch TV? Because we've been good all the way home. It's universal, folks. All children say those kinds of things. They don't have to be taught that. That they just know innately. Do we get to watch TV now? Because we've been good all the way home. To which I said, I know you'd like to watch your favorite TV program, but girls, the very moment you chose to fight in the back seat of this car, at that very moment, you chose to give up TV for today. Cry loudly. You would have thought the world was coming to an end. Would you believe, they did not watch TV, folks. Would you believe my daughters chose to give up TV 9 days in a row? Do you realize how I'm able to stand before you and say that? I don't have to say, would you believe I had to take TV away from my kids 9 days in a row? I didn't. I would have chosen for them to get to watch TV. They chose to give up TV 9 days in a row. And then a marvelous thing began to happen in the back seat of my automobile. A fight would start, one would start punching the other, or say something, or look at them, or breathe on them. And the other would say, stop that, you're going to cause us to have to choose to give up TV today. They started correcting their own behavior. Isn't that what we want? It's called self-control and self-responsibility. That I won't always be there to control them. When my son was 4 years of age, I was walking down the hallway of my home one morning, and there are his pajamas in the middle of the bathroom floor. And I suddenly realized I've been seeing these things all over the house. He used to put them up. I think maybe he's read some book somewhere that says, leave your pajamas out everywhere. They're just out everywhere. I go in the next room, he's watching Mr. Rogers. I turned the TV off and I said to him, Craig, we are about to institute a new and significant policy within the confines of this household. I got his attention. Folks, I have used that so much that when I say that, for my children, the world stops because they know something's about to be said that will affect my very life. And Craig, the policy is, when you choose to put your pajamas in the dresser drawer where they belong, you choose to get to watch Mr. Rogers that morning. Now notice that I've shifted from all day with my 9-year-old and my 6-year-old to that morning for my 4-year-old. That's all a 4-year-old can last, half a day. Whole day, that's eternity. So you'd never put anything off limits for a whole day for a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. When you choose to put your pajamas in the dresser drawer where they belong, you choose to get to watch Mr. Rogers that morning. When you choose not to put your pajamas in the dresser drawer where they belong, you choose not to get to watch Mr. Rogers that morning. The next morning, I'm walking down that same hallway. I go past his bedroom door. There are his pajamas right in the middle of his floor. I go in the next room. There he is watching Mr. Rogers. As I walked into the room, I didn't even get a chance to say anything. He suddenly realized why I'm there. He jumped up, ran past me, headed for his bedroom. And I'm going along behind him saying, Craig, Craig, son, I think I know what you have in mind. He's grabbing his pajamas and shoving them in the dresser drawer. You think that now that you put your pajamas away, then you choose to get to watch Mr. Rogers. But Craig, the very moment you left those pajamas in the middle of your floor, at that very moment, you chose not to watch Mr. Rogers. Cry loudly. You would have thought the world was shattering. But he did not watch Mr. Rogers because he had chosen not to. The very next morning, I am walking down that same hallway. There are his pajamas right there in the middle of the hall. Our hall goes like this. I'm going this way, and Craig's coming this way, and we meet looking at his pajamas. He looked up at me and said, "I know, Dad, I choose not to watch Mr. Rogers this morning, but tomorrow I'm going to remember." And he did. He did. With choice giving, folks, goes self-responsibility. It does not work the same to say, if you don't put your pajamas away, you can't watch Mr. Rogers. That's a threat. And you don't learn anything about self-control and self-responsibility. When that same son was now 7 years old and in second grade, he came home one afternoon. It had been a terrible, horrible, no good day for him. Mom called us to dinner. He's slow coming to the dinner table. Too slow. He finally slouched into his chair, looked out over the table, and announced, "This looks gross." Do your children know that word? This looks gross. And then he made some equally disparaging other remark before I could react, and I said, "Craig, if you choose to sit at the table, you choose to eat. If you choose to eat, you choose to get to have dessert." Mom had baked a chocolate pie that afternoon. It is the whole family's most favorite dessert in the entire world. We all love chocolate pie. I didn't even get to go on with my choices. When I said, if you choose to eat, you choose to get to have dessert, he promptly announced, "I don't want any of that crummy pie." He loves it, but he's going to be obstinate. So I said, "So you choose to not to eat and you choose not to have dessert." "Right," he said. So I excused him from the table. We finish eating. Mom goes to the refrigerator to retrieve the chocolate pie. Craig is in the next room. He has great ears. He can even hear a refrigerator door open. And he suddenly realized what's about to happen. It's dessert time. Here he came, streaking into the kitchen, dumped into his chair, didn't even wait for his fork, grabbed a whole handful of food, and he's shoving it in his mouth. And I'm saying to him, Craig, son, I think I know what you have in mind. You think that now that you eat a whole bunch of food, then you choose to get to have dessert. But Craig, the very moment you chose not to eat, at that very moment, you chose not to have chocolate pie. Folks, what I am teaching my children is, at the very moment that you make a decision, you are committed. At the very moment that a 15-year-old out there on the other side of town, away from you, out of your safety zone, chooses to swallow a pill that shouldn't go inside anybody's body, at that very moment they are committed. Their chromosomes may be altered forever because of that chemical. No matter how much you would like to take it back, you can't. At the very moment that that 16-year-old chooses to drive 65 miles an hour down the street and runs over some child on a tricycle, at that moment they are committed. And no matter how much you would like to take that tragedy back, you can't. And I want my children growing up with that kind of sense of responsibility, that I make choices and I'm committed when I make the choice. I'll have to live with it. At the very moment, Craig, that you chose not to eat, at that very moment, you chose not to have chocolate pie. That was one interaction. The other interaction is my wife is standing behind my son, holding the chocolate pie, saying to me, "Can he just have a little piece?" Moms, it's hard to be tough, but there are times when you must be tough. Better to be tough when they're 7 years old and 8 years old and 10 years old than to try to be tough as you may need to be when they're 16 and 17 and it's too late to be tough then. So I took my wife into the next room and I said, "Monisa, 5 years from now, which will have had the greatest impact on our child's life? The fact that he was allowed to consume a little sliver of chocolate pie tonight, or the fact that he was allowed to live with the consequences of his own choice. Folks, when we walk down the road 5 years and look back, it will be crystal clear how we need to react now. How we need to react now. How will our children ever learn how to make choices, to make life's most important choices? How will they ever learn that if we don't give them some practice in how to make those choices now, while we have time to help them to learn that? Now, let me stop here and see if there are some questions. Yes. Go ahead. You can break the ice.
Well, my child is only 4 months old.
Yes.
What can I start doing now to, get to that point before he's a terrible 2-year-old?
Let me share with you a personal experience. I had shared the choice giving with a relative, and then later we were visiting in their home, and the 6-month-old baby was there on a pallet and started being whiny and squirmy, and this young father walked over, crouched down, and said, "If you choose to cry, you choose to go up to your room. If you choose not to cry, you choose to get to stay down here with us." And then he looked at me, and I must have had some kind of look on my face like, what's going on? Because he said, "Oh, I know Gary. He doesn't understand what I'm saying, but by the time he gets old enough to understand it, I'm going to have it down pat." So I would say to just begin verbalizing it, and your child will grow up with it, but don't expect your child to understand and comply. To be more specific with your question, I think about 2 years of age is an appropriate time to begin the choice giving. And then you must always keep in mind the rule of thumb that you give big choices to big kids and little choices to little kids, and find out what's important to them. Those of you who have teenagers, it's not too late to start the choice giving. If you choose to have the car back in the garage at 12 o'clock on Saturday night, as we have agreed, then you choose to get to have it next weekend. If you choose not to have it back in the garage at 12 o'clock, like we've talked about, then you choose not to have it the next weekend. And folks, if they come in at 12:30, you don't have to get upset about it. You just simply make a statement. "I see you've chosen not to have the car for your dates next weekend." And then they get a chance to live with responsibility. A child is insisting on chocolate chip cookies right now. They've just come out of the oven, but it's 15 minutes before dinner time. But they want it now because they're 3 years old, and the world can't wait when you're 3 years old. But you can help your 3-year-old to learn to wait by saying to them, "The cookies are for after dinner. You may choose to have your chocolate chip cookies after dinner with milk, or you may choose to have your chocolate chip cookies after dinner with ice cream. Which do you choose?" And then you ask for a commitment. Folks, when you give a choice, it changes the child's focus away from, "I want it now," to, "I've got to process the choice." The mind just naturally works that way to process choices. Is there another question? Yes.
I do pretty good given the choice, but then my 3-year-old usually, he listens to the choice, then he usually lays on the floor and spazzes out and screams, and I'm sitting there giving him the choice. What do you do after that?
Once you've given the choice and he starts that behavior, you leave the room. It's very difficult to carry on a full-blown temper tantrum with no audience.
Because usually the more I watch him, the angrier I get, and I forget the choice I even gave him.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because I need to tell you there's another rule of thumb that goes with the Oreo cookie theory, and the rule of thumb is don't OD on choices. Don't overdose on choices. Choices are sort of like aspirin. 2 aspirin will generally cure a headache. 100 in one day will kill you. Don't go around giving 100 choices in one day. You work on one thing, one major thing at a time. We're working on this, so I've given a choice about that. I'm not going to give a choice about 10 other things today. Yes?
How do you have a 3-year-old child get to bed early using the choice thing? I have a real knowledge.
Bedtime is a very difficult time for many parents. And I think one of the things we need to establish right off is you cannot make a child go to sleep. Right? Now you can insist and ensure that they stay in the bed. But you cannot insist that they go to sleep, because you can't make them go to sleep. You can ensure that they stay in bed, and it can be with the choice giving. If they're too young for the choice giving, it means you take them back to the bed as often as you have to, and just know this has to be done. In the same way that you got up when they were 2 weeks old, you got up when they cried because it had to be done, even though you didn't want to get out of bed now for the 5th time tonight. But you did anyway. So you take them back for the 20th time and put them back in bed, and always with the same message of you are to stay in the bed. You can avoid some negative pitfalls in the process. One is, do not lay down with your child until they go to sleep. And the reason is your child learns not to comfort themselves and drift off to sleep until you're there. Until you're there. And it's not that we're trying to be cruel or mean or anything. It is that it is good for your child to learn to calm themselves enough to drift off to sleep, so that when they get older, teenagers, and then our age, they are able to calm themselves when they need to, not to drift off to sleep, but to get through the day. So that is an important learning that occurs for children when they're allowed to be in bed by themselves without you're patting them on the back until they've gone to sleep 30 minutes later, or laying on the bed for 45 minutes, or rocking them for an hour and a half. Or I know one mom and dad, that they took turns taking their child for a ride in the car at bedtime because he would fall asleep in the car. And then they'd take him in and put him to bed, and that's the only way they could get this child to sleep. You can, though, help them to learn to stay in bed for the choice giving, to get back to the choice giving. If your child is old enough for the choice giving could be, if you choose to get out of bed, you choose not to watch, if Mr. Rogers is their favorite thing in the morning, you choose not to watch Mr. Rogers in the morning. If you choose to stay in bed, you choose to get to watch Mr. Rogers in the morning. Now, you'll have to really work on that, because tomorrow in the morning is an eternity for a 3-year-old. But they can put those two things together if you're consistent. I would never give a child a choice of, if you choose to stay in bed, you choose to keep the night light on. If you choose not to stay in bed, you choose for the night light to be turned off, or you choose for the door to be closed. That's much too frightening for a child. Let me give you some encouragement. This too will pass.